Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the pens from my collection that I would not replace. I'm going to begin with my Twisbee Mini AL with the blue anodized trim. Now, this is the first pen that I ever got on a waiting list for, and as soon as I got the notification that it was in stock at Goulet, I hopped on my phone and ordered one. Now, as these pens started arriving, there was some disappointment expressed in how different the blue was from the blue that was in the marketing material. The blue in the marketing material was a little more vibrant, and I was a little bit disappointed, but I still like the color of the pen that I got, and I've used this pen a lot. This was one of my more used workhorse pens at school, but this this anodized aluminum is just very slippery to me. And so as my collection has grown, I've used this pen less and less, and I rarely use it anymore. I have to make a conscious effort to pick it up and ink it up, just because I haven't used it very much. And honestly, there are other pens in my collection I would rather use. These Twisbees have a rather large ink capacity, and I like to switch up my inks quite a bit, so I just don't always reach for this one. Now, I do wish that I would have gotten a Twisbee Mini with a plastic section. I've been tempted to get one of the, I think it's a white and rose gold Twisbee Minis. That is pretty tempting to me, but it still has a larger ink capacity than I prefer. I prefer the amount of ink that can be held in a converter because I like to switch up my inks pretty frequently. So even though I like the size of this pen, I still haven't pulled the trigger and gotten a mini with the plastic section. I've also tried my sister's ALRs. They have the anodized section, but those grooves in it give it just enough grip that it does feel good in my hand, but then the 580 has an even larger ink capacity. So again, that's just something that I haven't really been drawn to, even though I love the look of the 580 and the Mini with the facets. It's an eye-catching pen, but there are just those two features, slippery section and larger ink capacity than I care for, that have kept me from purchasing either one of those. Another pen that I would not repurchase is the Autotache. This is a pen that I looked at early on in my fountain pen hobby, and I was really interested in pocket pens back then, and I've got the pale pink. The lighting's not the best right now, but I have the pale pink, and I just loved the look of this pen. I love the way it goes from a tiny little pocket pen to a really nice full-size pen, and the way it sits in my hand feels really nice. But just like with the Twisbee Mini, it's got an anodized aluminum section. The diameter of it is nice. I kind of like narrow pens, but this is just so slippery for me. It's just not comfortable. I got it to use with Iroshizuku Momiji, and it looks great with that ink. Momiji is a pink-leaning red ink, but anytime I have inked this pen up, I just regret it. By the time I've used up a cartridge full of ink, I'm happy to clean it out and put it away. It's okay, I guess, for little short notes, but even that, the section is just too slippery for me. The pen that has replaced the Autotache as my Iroshizuku Momiji pen is my Platinum Preppy Wa with the sakura flowers. Another pen that I would not repurchase is my Caveco Lily Put in the aluminum black finish. I would still get a Caveco Lily Put, but I think I would prefer it in the brass material. This aluminum material is just so light. It's like the pen is not even there. And I guess I mean, it's okay to write with, but I prefer just a little more weight in my hand. And another reason I would prefer more weight is when you're using this as a pocket pen, I forget it's in my pocket and it's gone through the washer once. It's been lost in the laundry a couple different times. And so I think if I had a little more weight, I would notice it and not forget about it. So I wouldn't buy the aluminum, but I would repurchase it in either the brass or the copper material. Next, I've got my Sailor Progear Slim. The reason I wouldn't repurchase this pen is because it has the 14 karat fine nib on it, and my gold fine nib of choice is the Pilot, and I don't find myself using this pen. If I want to use a fine nib, I use one of my Pilot pens with a fine nib. Now, I do like the size and shape of this pen. If I did repurchase a Progear, I would definitely get it with a medium nib. I absolutely love the Sailor medium nibs, and there are certain inks that I actually prefer in the Sailor medium nib rather than the Pilot medium. Something about the way, the feedback of the nib. It tends to be those undersaturated, watery inks I tend to like in the Sailor medium nib. Another thing about this pen, when I got it, I got a really good deal on it, and white probably wouldn't be my finish of choice if I were going to repurchase a Progear. As my collection stands right now, I use my Sailor 1911 with a medium nib much more than the Progear Slim. And for a while, I thought the 1911 was a form factor that I preferred over the Progear Slim. And really, I think I like either form factor equally. It's just that this one has the nib that I prefer. Another nib that I really like from Sailor is the stainless steel medium fine. I really like the way that nib performs, and I would like to try a medium fine, maybe on a Progear Slim. That might be, instead of getting another medium nib, maybe get a medium fine, maybe a Progear Slim with a gold tone medium fine. That way I could switch nibs back and forth between the two pens. I guess that would probably be the route I would go if I were going to repurchase a Progear Slim. The next pen I would not repurchase is a Platinum 3776 with a 14 karat fine nib. And this is the exact same story that I just told with my Sailor Progear Slim. This fine nib I'm not as fond of as the Pilot fine nibs, so it just doesn't get much use. The pen that does get more use is my 3776 with a medium nib, and it's the same story as my Sailor pen. It has a nice feedbacky medium nib that performs really well with certain inks, and this one just gets a lot more use. I never use this fine nib anymore, and I'm glad that the one that I did get in the medium nib has the silver trim. I really like the look of that black and silver. Really classy. I also would not repurchase a Moonman M800. I bought this pen just to see if I would like this unusual shape section. I had my eye on a Leonardo Momento Zero, but before I dropped a large amount of cash on a pen that I might find uncomfortable, I wanted to try the $20 Moonman. And now that I know I like this section, if for some reason I were either to go back in time with the knowledge that I have now, I wouldn't need to buy this, or if something happened to my collection, I would have no interest in replacing this now that I have a Momento Zero. And the nib and mostly it's the feed. The nib was just so-so on this pen, really generic feeling, but the feed has trouble delivering a consistent ink flow, so I don't use this pen. I use it for playing with ink sometimes, but I don't actually use this pen. My Leonardo Momento Zero, though, has a feed that looks very similar to the Moonman feed, but something about it, it just delivers a nice consistent ink flow. And I bought a replacement nib. Now I have an extra fine nib that came with the pen. I have a fine nib, and I have a flex nib that is supposed to be delivered later today. So now I have lots of options with my Leonardo Memento Zero. And I love the shape of the section. Next, I was torn whether or not I should include my Creveco Perko on this list of pens that I would not repurchase. I thought when I bought this that the shape of the section might be something that was a turnoff to me, and I don't mind it, but it's the type of plastic it's made out of. It just feels so cheapy. I don't find myself using it very much. Another factor is it's a longish kind of pen. I know you can get clips for it now, but something about just the size of the pen, it's a little too chunky for me. And what I hate about this is I absolutely love this nib. It's got a chalky feel on paper. I guess that may have something to do with the finish that's on it. I love the nib. So I guess maybe I'll look into possibly other pens that this nib might fit into. I don't know. I love the nib, but the rest of the pen, it looks nice, and it's a great pen. I can just throw it in my purse, but I just don't find myself using it anymore. I'm back at school for just a semester, and I haven't taken it to school yet. There are other pens that are kind of ahead of it in my list of pens that I want to use while I'm at school, but I like the look of this pen, but just the feel and the chunkiness of it is just something that's not appealing to me right now. Another pen that I picked up really early in my fountain pen hobby, this may have been the second pen I bought. The first pen I ever got was a Caveco Sport, and this is a Monteverde Perko. I got this to use with my traveler's passport size notebook, and it just works nicely with that notebook. It's a nice pocket-sized pen. I really like the weight of it and the size of it in my hand, but the section is chrome-plated, and that just doesn't work for me. Smooth anodized aluminum and chrome are just two materials that are deal breakers for me on a pen section. Now, I can hold it up a little bit higher, but then a second thing is this has a medium nib. And for a pocket pen, usually something like this, especially if I'm using it with a small notebook, I need a finer nib. I'm writing smaller. So the medium nib, the slippery section, I probably would not repurchase this pen. A Monteverde pocket pen that I prefer over it is my Monteverde Pocket Ritma. It has a chrome section also, but something about, I guess I hold it on the crease between the two materials, and I just don't find my grip slipping around, and I absolutely love this tiny Omniflex nib. It's not very flexy, but it does have a slight stubbiness to it, and it's pretty fine. I just love the nib on this pen. A couple other pocket pens that are a little more similar to the design of the Perko are the Conklin Mini Graphs. And they have chrome sections, well, but I guess also like the Pocket Ritma, I guess I hold it on the threads here, so it's not as much of an issue. And something about this chrome feels different. It feels, I don't know. Maybe it's just that I hold it on the threads. And I like the nibs on these two pens. I've got I think this one's this one's an extra fine, and this one's a stub nib. I like the way they write, and I like the feel of the pens in my hand. I like the material. It's grippier and feels nicer. Prettier pens. They have a little more character. And so these two types of pens I think are better options than the Perko. In fact, you can still buy the Perko. I see it sometimes on Amazon, but it's no longer being made to my knowledge. I also would not repurchase my Jinhao X750 in this matte black finish. When I bought it, I already had one in the lacquer finish, and I really liked it, but I wanted something a little more, I guess, professional looking. But the first thing I noticed when I received this model is that matte black finish, the pen won't post securely. It's too slippery for the pen to post. And I like the feel of the X750. It's a little bit long, but it's pretty nicely balanced when it's posted. However, if you get a model with the lacquer finish, the lacquer's a little grippier, and so it posts really nicely. So I still like the X750. I probably don't need more than one of them. So if I were starting my pen collection over, when I picked out which X750 I wanted, I would definitely get one with a shiny lacquer finish. The next pen I would not repurchase is my Bexley sleeve filler. Now, the first time I ever saw this pen, I thought it was the ugliest thing out there. But when I saw one in this finish, I think this is called the camouflage finish. I don't know if you'll be able to tell from this video, but it's got dark red, dark olive green, and black. I just think it's beautiful. And it's got a number 5 size nib, which is, I guess you would call that my signature nib size. I have very few pens with number 6 size nibs, and I wanted a nice stub nib, and I did my research before I bought this one, and it seemed like everybody who got the stub nib had major issues with baby's bottom. But I still wanted a stub nib, so I bought the one with the stub nib anyway, even though I think there was a medium nib available. And of course, it has major baby's bottom and skips like crazy. I've worked on it and worked on it. I've gotten it to write a little bit better, but it still skips enough that it's aggravating. So I would not buy this pen with the stub nib. I would give it a try with the medium nib, though, because this is the only pen I have that has an ebonite feed, and the ink flow is beautiful. When it does write, when the ink makes contact with the paper, it is such a luxurious feeling, and I like the finish on this pen. So I would not get it with the stub nib, but I would definitely give it a try with the medium nib. And after making my video about the pens that I would replace in my collection, one of the pens I included in that list was my Pilot Metropolitan. And immediately after making that video, I discovered that there was ink leaking from the seam on the section. And I'm like, wow, I don't really want to buy another Pilot Metropolitan. But I do like having a Pilot Metropolitan in my collection. And I guess I can't remember if I made this point in that video. I intended to, but I can't remember if I did. This Pilot Metropolitan kind of was a representative of all the steel Pilot nibs in my collection. I like all of them, the Metropolitan, the 78G, the Explorer, all of those pens, the Prera, of course, that I love. All of those pens that use this little number 5 size steel nib have a valuable place in my collection. Certain ones I use more than others, like the Prera is probably my favorite, but I also have discovered that I really enjoy the Explorer in certain situations, and there are certain situations that I like the weight of this Pilot Metropolitan. Now, the good thing about all of those pens that I just mentioned is they all use the same size nib, and some of them use the exact same section, like the 78G uses the same section as the Pilot Metropolitan. So I don't have to repurchase my Pilot Metropolitan. I can, when I want to use it, I can just use the section off of my black 78G, and if I'm not too picky about the nib matching the rest of the hardware, I can just switch sections. Or if I want to use this specific nib, I can just pull the nib and feed and swap those. And so the good thing about having some redundancy like that in your collection is you may not have to repurchase an entire pin. And the same thing goes for all of my Pilot Gold Nib pins. I have a lot of redundancy in my collection there. And almost every pin type, I have one of each, a fine and a medium. And so in certain pin models, there's some overlap in the pins that, for instance, use the number 5 size gold nibs, and there's some overlap in the pin models that use the number 3 size gold nibs, like the Legno, the Stargazer, and the Grants. I think those nibs are interchangeable. And my Custom 74 and my Custom Heritage 91, I can swap nibs between those two. So having some interchangeability with those pins, if something happens, then you don't necessarily have to replace an entire pin. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.